I told my fiancée I was canceling our wedding 3 weeks before the ceremony. She thought I was leaving her. I wasn't, but by the end of that night, she left anyway. My parents had me late in life. My dad was 46 when I was born. My mom was 43. By the time I graduated college, most of my friends still had parents going on vacations and posting photos from beach resorts. Mine were arguing about blood pressure medication and retirement accounts. When I was 25, my older sister Claire died in a car accident. She left behind a 10-year-old son named Noah. At first, my parents stepped in. Noah moved into their house. They enrolled him in a new school, put family photos in his bedroom, tried to make things feel normal. For a while, it worked. Then my dad had a stroke. Nothing catastrophic, but enough that he couldn't drive anymore. My mom became his full-time caregiver almost overnight. Doctor appointments, physical therapy, medication schedules, everything. The stress aged both of them 10 years in one. Noah started spending more time at my apartment after school. At first, it was just Fridays, then weekends, then random weekdays. One night, he showed up carrying a backpack and asked if he could stay over because my grandparents were arguing again. He was 11. He called them grandparents sometimes by accident. That was how old they felt. I was engaged to Emily by then. We'd been together 5 years. The venue was booked. Invitations were sent. Her dress was already paid for. One Saturday, we were touring honeymoon packages when my phone rang. It was my mom. She sounded exhausted. Dad had fallen getting out of the shower. The ambulance was on the way. Could I pick Noah up from soccer? Of course. That became the routine. Soccer practice, school pickup, homework, dinner, repeat. Months passed. Then one afternoon, the school called me. Noah had gotten into a fight. I left work and drove over immediately. The principal sat us down and asked what happened. Noah wouldn't talk. Not at first. Eventually, he admitted another kid kept joking that nobody wanted him, that his mom was dead, that his grandparents were too old to keep him, and that he'd probably end up in foster care eventually. The kid was a jerk, but the worst part? Noah believed him. On the drive home, he stared out the window and asked me something. If grandma dies too, where do I go? I didn't know what to say, so I lied. I told him he'd always have somewhere to go. That answer came back to haunt me 6 months later. My dad had another stroke. This one was worse. 3 days in intensive care, 2 surgeries, a rehabilitation center afterward. My mom finally sat me down at the hospital cafeteria. She looked exhausted, like she'd been carrying a weight for years and had finally reached the point where her arms couldn't hold it anymore. Then she said it. We can't do this anymore. I knew exactly what she meant. Noah was 13. My dad needed constant care. My mom could barely keep herself together. Something had to give. That night I told Emily. We were eating takeout at our apartment. The wedding was 19 days away. I explained everything. I explained what my mom said. I explained what would happen if nobody stepped in. Then I told her I was planning to take legal guardianship of Noah. She didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, she asked one question. For how long? I stared at her because there wasn't an answer. Maybe a year, maybe 5, maybe forever. She started crying immediately. Not angry crying, heartbroken crying. The kind that makes you feel guilty even when you think you're doing the right thing. She reminded me we never wanted kids. She reminded me of every conversation we'd had over the last 5 years. Every plan, every dream, every reason we chose that life. I agreed with all of it. That was the worst part. I agreed. But Noah still needed someone. Emily asked if I was really willing to risk our future for this. I looked down at the table. Then I remembered a 13-year-old kid sitting in a principal's office asking where he'd go if everyone else disappeared. And I had my answer. The next morning I called a lawyer. 3 days later, Emily moved back in with her parents. The wedding was canceled the following week. Most people assumed I cheated. Some thought Emily got cold feet. Neither of us corrected them. It hurt less that way. Noah moved into my apartment that summer. He brought 2 duffel bags, a video game console, and a cardboard box filled with old birthday cards from his mom. The first night he asked where he should sleep. I showed him the spare bedroom. He stood in the doorway for a second, then asked if he was allowed to put posters on the walls, like he was afraid the room wasn't really his. I told him he could paint the walls if he wanted. That made him laugh. For the first time in months. Life wasn't easy after that. There were parent-teacher conferences, emergency dentist appointments, soccer tournaments, arguments about homework, arguments about screen time, arguments about literally everything. Sometimes I'd come home exhausted and wonder if Emily had been right. Then Noah would do something stupid, like leave a thank you note on the fridge because I bought his favorite cereal, and suddenly the whole thing felt worth it again. 2 years passed. Then one Saturday my phone rang. It was Emily. I hadn't heard her voice since the wedding. She asked if we could meet for coffee, so we did. We talked for almost 2 hours. Work, family, life, everything. Eventually she asked about Noah. I showed her photos, soccer games, school awards, a ridiculous haircut he'd given himself last year. She laughed at every single one. Then she got quiet and said something I'll never forget. You know, I used to think you chose him over me. I didn't say anything. She smiled, then looked down at her coffee. I think you just chose the person who needed you most. And for some reason that made me smile. Because years earlier I promised him he'd always have somewhere to go. That turned out to be true.